Okay, kia ora and welcome to Love Literacy Inspired, a podcast where we explore the real stories behind Aotearoa's literacy journeys. I'm Heather Down, founder of Love Literacy and passionate advocate for structured evidence-based teaching. And in each episode, I sit down with inspiring New Zealanders, teachers, parents, advocates, and learners to hear about how literacy has shaped their lives, their work, and their hearts. So whether you're in the classroom or at the kitchen table or just keen to learn, I'm so glad you're here. So let's dive in. And today I am super excited to welcome Rupert Denton onto the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today.
You're
Um,
welcome. Thank you for having me.
oh, cool. I'm excited. We were just talking a little bit offline, and I was saying I'm excited about today's episode, just digging down and finding all about yourself and Spellcaster. So can you just start with telling me or telling us a little bit about yourself and where your journey began?
Awesome. Yeah, of course. Well, thanks, Heather. And yeah, it's great to be. This is the first podcast I've ever done. So go gentle. But yeah, no, I'm stoked to be here. So a bit about me. Yeah, I'm Rupert. I'm Australian. I was born in Canberra, raised in Melbourne, but now live in beautiful Dunedin down in the South Island, the south of the South Island. So I'm really loving it here. We moved over in 2022 with my wife, who's a Kiwi, and our two young children. She was very passionate about raising them here in New Zealand, and more connected to culture. And she's Ngāi Tahu as well, so connected to their culture in that respect as well. So it's great to be here, and I'm very honoured to be a Kiwi, sort of I suppose an honorary Kiwi living down here. And now I suppose I was a teacher for 10 years before moving over to New Zealand, and now I'm, as you mentioned, building a program called Spellcaster, which is a software or an online literacy platform focused particularly on spelling through phonics and morphology, and geared more to our older learners, so nine plus age groups. Yeah, I launched that last year, and yeah, I'm excited about how it's going, and yeah, but very very excited to be here to talk literacy. It's definitely a big passion of mine as well, Heather.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So 10 years of teaching. Yeah. So what year levels, or tell me a little bit about te your teaching journey that you've had.
Yeah, sure. So as a teacher, I started teaching through a program called Teach for Australia back in maybe 2012 or 2013. And so Teach for Australia is a program to take, I suppose, high performing graduates with a lot of discipline knowledge in their field, and then get them into schools that are hard to staff, often in lower socioeconomic areas where there is less resources for the teaching, and they want to sort of get expert domain experts into classrooms essentially. And so that's the program I went through, and the way that works is you sort of start teaching and do your degree as you teach over 2 years. So you really do get thrown in the deep end, and you're often working
Oh,
in schools that um, can be, they're very complex environments. All schools are complex, but these ones in particular. And so began teaching through that program in a school in rural Victoria, so about 3 hours outside of Melbourne, in a town of about 5,000 people, a country secondary school. I taught grade 7 through to grade 12. So in Australia, that's 13-year-olds through to 18-year-olds. And I taught everything from fundamental literacy programs to legal studies and global politics at the upper end of the schooling. At the kids year 12s. And so that was interesting because that was my first foray into literacy as a subject that's not just kind of English. It's the kind of more the, I suppose, the under the hood part of literacy. And coming into that in 2013 as a secondary teacher with no background in formal literacy instruction. One of my methods, I studied Spanish, and so they said, "Well, you studied Spanish, so we think you can teach literacy," which was definitely not true. And so we had to basically learn as we go. And during that time, we pretty much learnt all the things that were the orthodox, but I think also now commonly accepted as the wrong way to do things.
mm.
So we did all our running records. We were using programs that were very much whole language. Very almost didn't hear the word phonics at all at that point in my career. I think someone said thrash once and went straight over my head. So we were just sort of learning as we went, and it was really challenging. Um, And I definitely look back at that time as you do what you know and you do your best with what you have. But we were definitely doing the wrong thing for those learners and for myself as a teacher. So from there, moved to a school in Melbourne, working. It's called Pavilion School, and that school I was at for 5 years before I moved to New Zealand. And the Pavilion works. All the kids we work with at the Pavilion had disengaged or been expelled from their mainstream school. So secondary, we had lots of kids coming to us with significant trauma history, significant instructional gaps. We had kids that had in and out of youth detention, homelessness, family violence. So really complex cohort of young people. And again, we had, 13, 14, 15, 16 year olds, 17, 18 year olds who had often were either illiterate or had very low literacy. And we're thinking, well, our job now is to get them to the point where they can go and get their degree or their TAFE certification so they can go and get a job or go into further education, or go back into the mainstream school if they can, and then sort of become flourishing members of the community for themselves and for the community. And so again, we were saying, well, how do we teach these kids to read? And again, reading recovery was kind of the thing we sort of started with and go, okay, the sort of three queuing and all that stuff. And then we pretty quickly, thanks to our speech therapist at the school and also our amazing instructional coach, Mel Henry, who's now at La Trobe University, began the journey into the science of learning and structured literacy. So I was the first teacher there to do sounds right training. And that was just like, it changed my life as a teacher, understanding when we did the science sounds right training and just understanding how, the idea of primary and secondary knowledge, how we learn, how our brains learn, phonics and how it works, synthetic phonics and how synthetic phonics works. It just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is like getting chiropractic, and I've learned all these things which we should have learned while we're doing our teaching degree, but we didn't. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that was really it was a game changer. So that's sort of, I suppose, my journey into literacy, from doing it wrong to doing it right, and understanding the kind of everything in between, and working with those older kids. And that's really where Spellcaster comes from. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, what an incredible journey. Far out. I'm just like, I mean, the whole idea of this podcast is to be inspired. And yeah, that's really inspiring. So I suppose with a lot of the really complex students that you're working with as well, you probably had a lot of ND, neurodiverse kids in there as well, and dyslexia and yeah, a lot of those kids type profiles as well, did you find?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think at the Pavilion School, around 20 or 28% of our kids were on the program for students with disabilities. So I think in New Zealand it's called
Right.
OARS.
Yeah.
And so those kids had everything from intellectual disabilities to autism spectrum disorder to
Yeah.
ADHD,
Yeah.
severe behavior disorder, whole range of different things. So we were what's called a specialist school, and typically in Australia, or in Victoria at least, where I taught, a specialist school works with kids with special needs, so disabilities. But we had that. We also had kids that didn't have that, didn't fit that, were maybe like 2 points below
Yeah.
getting that funding or being on the PSD, but they still were significantly complex young people, with a whole host of different presentations. So yeah, that was that. Yes, it was a very complex cohort of kids. And at the school I worked, the country school I worked at as well, I mean, it was, again, I think what happens in Australia, at least, or Victoria, is that the housing prices in the inner city become such that people move out to the outer suburbs and then to regional areas. And so we had a huge community of young people who were, again, could have fit the Pavilion School profile, but were in a school that was not at all fit for purpose for them. They were just trying to sort of work through the year levels, and the teachers were trying to work with them through the year levels. And it was really, really
Mm.
challenging. The Pavilion was built to kind of like wrap around kids like that, but
Mm.
most schools don't have that luxury, and most teachers don't have that luxury. Most kids also don't have an opportunity to have a wraparound service as a
Mm.
school. And so, yeah, I got to work with, I guess, kids with those complex presentations, in both a mainstream school where it was really, really hard, and in a specialist school where we had much more of the supports wrapped around, but it was still tricky. But yes, we worked with a lot
Yeah.
of kids with those neurodiversity.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh yeah. That's really cool. I love that. I love that side of the journey. And doing sounds right training kind of opened up a whole new era of literacy for you from the sounds of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. We were really lucky at the Pavilion School. We had, as a teacher, I was sort of pilotee of doing the Sounds Right training, and that was mind blowing.
Okay.
And then we got, and then the rest of my team went and did the Sounds Right training. But at the same time, we were also working really closely because we were associated with a school nearby La Trobe University. We were working really closely with likes of Professor Pamela Snow, Professor Tanya Seri, Dr. Nate Swain, who were, and Nate at that time was working at the Parkville Youth Detention, I think, as a speech therapist. So a lot of the kids that came out of Parkville, which is a youth detention centre in Melbourne, would come to the Pavilion School, and often Pavilion School kids would sometimes end up back in Parkville. So there was a connection between the two schools. And so Nate came over and did some PD with us. But at the same time, we were like, I think, one of the piloting schools of the solar lab, the solar project with the Professor
Wow.
Snow and Professor Seri run. So I maintained a connection with both of those people and with Dr. Nate Swain as well through that. So it was a very powerful time for us as a school, and that I think we really all just got on board with not just, I think from there, it's like, okay, phonics, that makes a lot of sense. And how we teach it makes a lot of sense. What else is out there that makes sense? The writing revolution makes sense. The reading revolution makes sense. And so from there, it became a bit of a snowball of like, what other practices can we bring in? And it was almost like the cognitive load of us as teachers just sort of like lifted off our shoulder, go, gosh, there's all this stuff I've been like painting over. How do we do this? Where do we start? What's the kind of space to do this in? It's all kind of there. And we just sort of needed a pit of success to get into and sort of follow the channel. So it opened our mind up to all the other kind of, I suppose, instructional approaches and resources that are out there that kind of, I suppose, fall under the umbrella of structural literacy or the science of learning as well.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing is that like the more of us, I mean, because that's similar to me, did spell training, took a little bit further, worked for Learning Matters, then did my
Yeah.
IMSLE training, and yeah, and each time I've gone in and I've delved into something a little bit more, it's opened up more ideas and more learning, and then yeah, all of a sudden I'm just like, oh yeah, off down the rabbit hole. Because you do, yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing sometimes because
Yeah.
it's like there's like the power of knowledge, right? But then there's also like there's the good side of knowledge and then there's the bad side of knowledge. So it's like the more you know, the more you want to know. I find sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find also the more you know, the less you know. The more you
Oh,
realize what you don't know. And so
yes.
for me, a big journey for the last 2 years has been, in the space of morphology, because as much as I love sounds right, it's very much that, I think it's print to speech or speech to print approach, or the print to speech, which were the phonological approach. I always get those two mixed up. But there
Yes.
was it was very little, it was very much like just sort of using sound to do everything. And I think, my learning was that, I think that was an amazing starting point for us. But then it's like, I think, for me it's like there was a point where we go, okay, there's something else that we're missing. And I don't know what it is. And it was like, I had morphology. And there's actually a balance between, English is a grapho, phonomorphemic language or a
Morphophonemic, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
morphophonemic language. And
Yep.
so, okay, there's two parts to it. So we need to understand both and sort of honor both parts of the language. And so, but that's really hard because you go, wow, now I've got to unlearn some things again. And I think as people who are invested in the science of learning, as a bigger umbrella, you have to understand that you're also going to have to go through unlearning and relearning and being self-critical and not get too stuck in kind of, okay, well, this is my thing now. It's like, no, no, ultimately this is a kind of a contestable space all the time, and we have to sort of be comfortable in that. And I also think, Heather, for me, something we always say at the Pavilion School is like, it always comes back down to what the learners need
Yes,
and what's best for the learners. So it's like
yes.
us up here being challenged academically between, oh gosh, do I now need to learn morphology and all the stuff that goes along with that? I see, okay, well, will that ultimately come down to benefiting learners? And if it's a yes, then it's like, yeah, you just got to do that hard work again. So yeah, to your point about knowledge, it's like the more you have, the less you have.
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's very similar to me because I was phonics based. But then what I just sort of found was it was rinse and repeat with some of these students that they just weren't getting some of those phonics and spelling rules. But then when I started looking into morphology, I again it's I thought, wow, actually, I'm going to combine the two. So, and Yeah, and I feel like sometimes it is a little bit trial and error, and some students you can't push them onto that morphology, but some students you can teach them a certain number of phoneme grapheme correspondences, and then oh,
Mm,
now we're ready. We can just dive into morphology because so much of that academic language, like especially around maths, and then once even writing, like even that academic describe, the academic language is based around these bigger, more multi-syllable words that if we have introduced a little bit of morphology and introduced them to these bigger words, then they're going to have a better
mm,
time with these other subjects. So it all kind of like crosses over and comes together. So yeah.
mm.
So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about your pathway. So we've got 10 years teaching, and you worked in the high needs schools within Oz, um, met your lovely wife, and moved over here to New Zealand. So tell me what happened after you left the high needs schools and made your way here.
Yeah. So I suppose, yeah, I mean, we were at I was at that school in Melbourne, and obviously COVID hit, and I think Melbourne had about 156. I think we were the longest lockdown city in the world, and so we had a lot of time. I had a lot of time to kind of beyond the kind of core work, going remote was very challenging, particularly for the kids that we had who often didn't have a desk or any form of like home study
Oh,
equipment. So
yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
my work became very operational, driving around trying to find dongles, and get it all set up to give to the kids and distribute food packages and all these other things. So it was very logistical. My work as an assistant, I was an assistant principal at that time, and I was less doing the kind of face or remote, screen to face teaching, whatever you want to call it at the time. I was much more on this team support and then just logistical stuff to keep the school running, to keep the kids supported. So, but during that time, I also started to dabble a little bit in software. I've always been interested in trying to learn to code, and I said, well, here's an opportunity I have because we've got literally nothing else to do and can't go outside. So I sort of started teaching myself coding at that point. And then towards the end of the lockdown, when we decided we wanted to move to New Zealand, after I sort of hit my long service leave essentially, so I could use that as a good time to shift over. I sort of thought, okay, well, we're moving over. I may as well see if I can try a different pathway for a little bit and see. I've done teaching for this long. I'd love to see if I can just make a go of software and engineering and programming. And so took what I had, did an amazing course called Dev Academy Aotearoa, which is a boot camp essentially. So sort of it was like 10 weeks or 3 months of basically really intensive coding workshops and study, and then got a job at a startup in Dunedin. But I think always had in the back of my mind this desire to create something that supported the kids that I worked with. And so really the software stuff I taught myself was really in service of that. Was going, eventually I want to build a resource that I would have loved to have to give to my 15-year-olds who are totally disengaged from decodables or whatever, because they've just been through it and they're sort of they have a strange relationship with their learning in that respect, that they need a different entry point. And so yeah, so that's kind of, I suppose, moved to New Zealand and did the startup, and which was a very pure software startup, nothing to do with education at that point. So I learned a lot around startups and how to do software in a more professional environment, and then left that and founded Spellcaster at the beginning of last year. But during that period of, I guess, before founding Spellcaster, spoke with a lot of people in the literacy space here in New Zealand, but also people back home in Australia around their experience, with older learners and literacy intervention and phonics,
Mm,
and
mm.
how they found that experience. And yeah, so that was my journey, I guess, moving from teaching to here now, or to New Zealand, and then out of the classroom and into the code, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And I like it because you're right. Like the older learner, it's really, really tricky because not only dealing with that disengagement, but you've got hormones and you got I mean there's just
Yeah,
so much going on with the older learner, and they've got all these walls up and these barriers up, which can make it quite hard to sort of work your way in.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So and yeah, so tell me a little bit more about Spellcaster and how it all works.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I sort of started Spellcaster more as a I suppose there's a bit of software to support phonics, particularly things like grapheme phoneme matching. I just started there. I started with one very simple little activity, and it was
Mm.
basically it's a card-driven mini game. It's something you would do having sounds right training. A lot of the thing I'm sure Heather, a lot of the resources used are kind of like just table-based, cards you drag and move
Yeah.
the cards around and manipulate cards. And so I was like, okay, can I build a digital version of that? Again, something that I could have used as a teacher with these kids, and it sounds like something that that's the more I'm speaking to school-based speech therapists in Australia, the more I'm speaking to people here in New Zealand, the more I'm speaking to my colleagues, my former colleagues in schools. Like, yes, we have these kids who still need that fundamental spelling support or reading support,
Yeah.
and we don't know where to start. We can't
Mm.
engage them with. They don't. The decodables feel too young for them. They,
Yes.
as you say, they're in a space where they don't feel a sense of social dignity with the resources they're given. And I had experienced that, and I just validated that problem and said, okay, so lots of people have that problem, so I'll build a little thing, and then just so it was really just a simple phonograph and card matching, and I immediately, as soon as I had that, I demoed it to the Spells team here in Dunedin because I'm really, 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 really focused on and big on getting feedback and critical feedback from people who are expert in the space constantly. So it's a big part of how we produce Spellcaster is to always be seeking feedback and validation for what we're doing, so we know that we're building something that's helpful rather than something that's just sort of fancy.
Mm.
And so yeah, from there it sort of grew, and it was sort of to a couple more card games. So we did okay, let's do some word chaining, let's do some word building, so let's do some sentence building. And so the more feedback we got about what would be helpful, the more we just sort of built it out. And then we sort of expanded the platform from just the game to also support explicit instruction offline. So I'm again, as a teacher, I use EdTech. I'm probably one of the biggest critics of EdTech, but I'm very clear-eyed about what it can and can't do,
Mm.
and we're very clear-eyed about what Spellcaster can and can't do is just a game. And so we said, okay, what else do we need? Like the game is really good for space practice, and I think it was I got on a call with Lynn Stone. She said, this would be helpful for space practice. And I said, that's great, but what do we need to do to help other, the actual instructional part of it? And I think that's where we sort of built out the lesson planning component. So Spellcaster has three parts. It's got a lesson planning component to support explicit instruction, the game to support space practice to get like lots of dosage and reps in of what you've just studied through your explicit instruction,
Yes.
and then the data to help understand where the kids' gaps and where are their strengths and where can we target our next bout of explicit instruction. And so the lesson planner is essentially a very easy to use drag and drop interface. I call it Canva for structural literacy lesson plans. It features a whole bank of drills, which all align with our scope and sequence. And the drills are everything from, visual drills for phoneme grapheme matching, auditory drills, phonemic awareness work, spelling, word chaining. It's all kind of built for you. And the genesis of that, as a teacher, again, trying to do sounds right in the classroom meant that often I couldn't do it. I couldn't do a tier two intervention while I had all these other kids there. So often my teacher aide would do the work. And I said, okay, she doesn't have the training. And often schools don't pay for the training for your EA or your education support teams. So it's like, if I can build something that my ES at the time could have picked up and has enough script on it, enough instruction on it to reduce her cognitive load. And so she can just sort of deliver that with the kids with minimal training from me and also with minimal setup for me or for her. We can say, let's just click generate lesson plan for this level, give it to her, give her the worksheet that goes along with it, and they should just run. She can run that with those kids. Then that's great. And so we're always working on making the lesson planner as easy as possible for a novice to run, not just an expert. So we get lots of, so for a parent who maybe never uses the game might just use a lesson plan to do the lessons, and that's it. Now the
Yeah.
game then plays its role in terms of reinforcing all that stuff, and it's a good space to get buy-in. And then the data is really cool too. So that's kind of the platform. Yeah, we're a small team, it's three of us doing it, and we're very passionate about what we're doing. One of the developers has a minor in linguistics as well, so he often knows a lot more than I do about some of this stuff. So he's always like, write everything. I think he's fluent in IPA, so it's great having him on the team as well because he has a lot of knowledge in the space. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah. I get the understanding of it all now, which is really awesome. So the idea is that you go in more in the intervention role with it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
currently being used. I think we've got about just touching 4,000 kids have been signed up to it since we started our pilot at the middle of last year. And it's typically being used in intervention spaces with, yeah, your sort of 9 to 15-year-old age bracket. We do
Yeah.
have some older schools, older kids using it as well. But typically it's for those kids that need a lot of catch up and support. And so, yeah, it'll be with your an intervention group, or it'll
Yep.
be a speech therapist will use it as part of her, tier three, essentially, one-on-one with the kid intervention there. In Australia, at least, or an interventionist in New Zealand might do it because it's always different in every country about what do speech therapists do in each country. In Australia, they do a lot more literacy work, and I think a lot less of that happens in the United States and also here in New Zealand on the speechy side. But I think then interventionists do that work. So it's interesting learning all of that. But yes, so it's typically used in the intervention space. And again, the lesson planning is there if you don't already have something. Because often what happens is people say, I've got MatClip, I've got Little Learners, I've got Sounds Right. So that's great. All I
Mm,
say is
mm.
use the game then alongside what you're teaching them explicitly. Don't
Yeah.
don't use the game as the kind of replacement for what you're doing, which often people don't,
Mm.
which is great. We want to see the game used as a kind of an adjunct to the kind of really important adult-led instruction. But yeah, so that's typically used in the intervention spaces.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess we've got to be a little bit careful that we drive home the point that you don't just sit there on your or like you're saying with your ed tech, don't just sit there on the ed tech. We've got the human interface side, we've got the human side of it
Yeah,
as well that's there, and you've obviously got that through the lesson plans that they can deliver the lesson plan as well. And
yeah,
yeah, and I what's quite cool is that you can have your teacher aides learn alongside students. And would the idea be to have it like out there for just parents of kids as well? Like if they wanted to, they could purchase like is that the vision for it as well?
yeah, 100%. I think ultimately we sort of see it as like this is just a tool that supports 9+ year old learners who require additional catch up and support with
Yeah.
their,
Yeah.
our vector in is spelling, and we think spelling is really powerful as a for reading and for
Mm.
spelling. You know, it's like you get your spelling. I think I heard Nate Swain say when you learn spelling, you get reading for free. So it's like because you're always that orthographic process of having to pull things out and write them down is quite effortful, and so it's quite powerful just for the process of orthographic mapping. So, and we also think a game is better off, or a computer assisted work is better off for spelling than necessarily like reading, because I think reading has some skills in it, like fluency and things like that. You need adults to sort of hear that. Spelling, you're going to get it right or wrong, and there's going to be patterns of error, and we can do all that programmatically and understand what's the kind of sub word level errors I've made here. But it's right or wrong. You know, the word float is spelt how it's spelt.
Yes.
And so we can sort of give that feedback and reinforcement through the computer assisted stuff. Whereas having to listen to a child read fluent and understand their fluency, their prosody, how they're decoding, that's something that I don't think computers could do very well. And I
Mm.
don't think they'll do very well for a while yet. So yes, so I guess sorry, it's a long answer to your question. Um, it is for that age group. And if
Yeah.
you are working with that age group, so if you're a parent, an interventionist, a teacher, a speechy, and you're working with that age group, then it's for you as well. And so we do have speech therapists in Australia who will print out the lesson plan and the worksheet that comes with it and give it to the parent to take home and do it
Yeah.
between sessions, and also use the game, then to support further practice. So yeah, we do have some households using it at the moment.
Yeah, actually, I really like the idea of that because, I do my sessions and then every week I print out a little homework sheet and I studiously give it to these kids and they studiously pop it in their folder and take it home and then it comes back the next week and it's like, oh, I can see you haven't done your review learning.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
hear that a lot. I hear that a lot.
I know. I mean, I always say to the parents, oh, if they do the review, then there's less time spent with me as an interventionist. So
Yeah,
yeah, it is
yeah,
always looking for that little way to um I don't know, just get a little bit more of that engagement. Yeah.
yeah. And I
So,
think having worked at the pavilions, oh sorry.
oh no, 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 you
Oh,
go
I was
ahead.
just yeah, I was having worked at the. I mean, this started off as a thing to support parents because I worked with those learners who had dropped out of their school and their parents are pulling their hair out, trying to watching the years go by and saying, I'm a parent now. I understand how stressful and traumatic that would be to just to see to have to sort of try to figure out how am I going to support my kid? Where are they going to go? They're
Mm.
missing out on all this instruction. What can I do? They won't, or they won't do any of the work that's they need to do at home to get the review in. So the game, in a way, is there as it feels appropriate for them to it feels kind of age appropriate, and that's very
Yeah.
deliberate, and it also feels kind of like okay, it's an easier sell to get the kids started on things. Like, okay, well, if they're not going to do anything, let's do this and start them there. So that at least they get engaging with, the phonics and their sort of granular skills. So
Mm.
I really wanted to build it as a kind of very low friction entry point for families who are trying to get their kids back on track a little bit and to help
Yeah.
them with that. So it's a tool that, I don't have to convince my child to do. They want to do it, which is kind of the goal a little bit as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Um, and so just talking about you've had a lot of inspiration from Pam Snow and Lynn Stone and Nathaniel Swain. Yeah. Who's probably your biggest inspiration? Like if I could ask you who in the literacy world inspires you the most, doesn't need to be one person, but where would you say your biggest inspiration comes from?
Yeah, good question. So in the literacy world, you know, um, I mean, Pam Snow is amazing, and I think whenever I hear her talk at a sharing best practice or an event, just the just the way she can deliver such important knowledge in such a kind of a digestible way that also feels kind of empathic to the experience of the educator. And I think I mean, I can email Pam, and she will respond to me, which feels very unusual for someone in her position. So, and I remember she said to me once, I prefer to the big conferences like the Reading League and things. I prefer the sharing best practices where it's kind of more a kitchen, sit around with a cup of tea and talk. I think that people that have all that knowledge and experience, but are willing to roll up their sleeves and work in the complex space of education,
Yeah.
alongside teachers and sort of directly talk to them and directly work with them, is just so inspiring. And I think Pam's career, as a speech therapist, but also working in the space of, I think, youth and adults in correctional facilities. I think that was her initial area of research. Really, that's sort of where I started. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then where it led to in terms of her work, driving and supporting
Mm.
the structural literacy growth of structural literacy in Australia, and the parents, her putting her shoulder to the wheel, of this grassroots movement led by things like Code Read in Australia and a range of other sort of these parents who just felt like they hadn't been listened to for a long time. Pam was someone who got in and fought for them and with them and alongside them. So I think she's a huge inspiration. And so and she's just an incredible person, and just such someone who's so willing to share their time and knowledge. And so I think Pam's definitely probably up there.
Yeah, probably out there. Yeah. I actually listened to her speak. I don't know if you're familiar with Artie from Human Chapters.
Yeah,
She interviewed, and I actually really love the way that she does this. So she's just called Pam I think
yeah.
it's not even like Dr. Pamela
I should say Professor Snow. I know.
a
So I
professor,
feel
oh,
like I
so
may be.
professor, yes, yes, I've done that before, professor. But yeah, she just, oh, I'm interviewing Pam today. And it's like, oh, I'm listening, realizing that it's Professor Pamela Snow. And yeah, and for me as well, like the listening to her speak about all her work in the with youth justice and correctional
Yeah.
facilities. Yeah. I mean, the forget, is it the prison pipeline. So the why we need to get education correct and literacy correct in school so that we're not facilitating that pathway or that pipeline
Mm.
moving
Oh
forward.
yeah, it's a huge correlate. I mean, it's a huge correlate with poor life outcomes, health wise,
Mhm.
legally.
Mm.
Poor literacy. Just the data's out there, the statistics are out there, the papers, the research are out there that there's a huge overrepresentation of people with low literacy or illiteracy in these
Mm.
categories. That people with the worst outcomes in terms of health,
Yeah.
education, employment.
Yes.
It's not the only factor, but it's a huge factor, and it seems to be very present. So it's hugely important work.
Yeah. Oh, look, 100% agree. Um, and I've got a couple more questions here. So my first question is what's next for so yeah, where do you see Spellcaster going, or where do you see Rupert Denton going in the near future? Oh, big question. That's a big question.
Yeah, that's going to trigger an existential crisis. No, I think where the position. So Spellcaster is a teacher-built platform. We have really strong connections with our user community. We have incredible people using it, and it's really the kind of wind in the sails of the platform. So we sort of go where the community tell us to go a little bit. A big part of my thing is just listening to our users and then listening to our learners. The kids, I get to go into schools now and speak with learners who are using it and ask them directly, like, how are you finding this? And what can we do to make it feel more meaningful educationally? What can we do to make it feel more engaging? And so we get all that feedback and we pipe that straight to the product. And so, yeah, we're in a place now where um, it's feeling really positive. We're getting really great feedback from people. It's been really interesting watching how it gets used. You sort of make a thing, and I'm not a speech therapist. I don't have dyslexia. I was sort of building this for me as a teacher, and then where it's being really seems used is in the speech therapy space. So for those kids that really need additional reps at an older age, but also in specialist schools. So in Australia, a number of specialist schools are using us with kids who might have an intellectual disability or a range of other disabilities and special needs. And so it's seen as a very helpful resource to work with those kids as well. So it's been, that's really powerful for us because it goes, okay, we really need to make sure that what we're building is scales the entire ladder of reading and writing, right? We can't just sort of
Yeah.
assume it's here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we have to think about, okay, what do kids that I've never taught, need and what would be helpful for their teachers. And so, so what's next is really where the community drives us, but we're in a position. So I guess we've been in a pilot as a product, which means we've had lots of people using us in different settings, giving us feedback and getting us to a point where we're quite stable, so we can sort of go out into the world as a commercial product. And we've got a very affordable. We've deliberately made our product extremely affordable because we see it as an adjunct to what you're doing as your kind of adult-led explicit instruction. We don't see it as a replacement for a teacher, a replacement for Learning Matters or any other amazing programs out there, Little Learners. We see it as something to be used alongside those things. And so we've built it and the scope and sequence and everything about it to kind of play nicely with all the things that are in the market, so to speak, now.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
means that we have speech therapists in Baltimore using us because we're not kind of limited. We're not sort of like we're only for New Zealand's curriculum or only for Victoria's curriculum or for New South
Yep.
Wales curriculum. We're kind of for phonics and morphology and spelling through that. And so our scope and sequence plays nicely with the U Flies, Sounds Right, Little Learners, all the big ones out there because we want to make sure that people can use this alongside the program that they're using for their core instruction. And so we're kind of So our guys, the near future for us is trying to stand up as a business. We need
Yep.
to go to the point where we can continue to improve and drive improvements into the products. That means we have to be self-sustainable. We've gotten some grants to this point, which has been amazing, but we need to sort of flap our wings now and go, okay, we need to build something that feels truly valuable for educators and learners and parents. And that's kind of what our next 12 months looks like, which is daunting but exciting.
Oh, that is really exciting. And the other thing, like the beauty of a digital product is that you're not constrained within like physical boundaries. So yeah, it's
No, yeah,
yeah, that's the real beauty of it. And I guess the only thing you have to think about then is I suppose you've had to do a little bit of research on like American English versus New Zealand
yeah,
English and
yeah.
British English and yeah, and like the spelling. Um, those tiny little spelling nuances between, color versus color and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. It's all on the roadmap. I'm working with a sound engineer here in Dunedin to begin understanding how we can efficiently bring in more accents, and also different gendered
Oh,
accents. Because we had a request
yeah,
from a school in
true.
Australia saying,
Yes.
people would love a female accent, and I was like, great, let's work on that. So again, as I said, we kind of go where the community takes us,
Yeah.
and it's really helpful to get that feedback. And to your point about software being sort of scalable and spreadable, that's true. The other thing it allows us to do is be flexible as a platform because we don't have a million resources printed based on our scope and sequence. We can go, if we get feedback from a literacy interventionist or an academic saying, I actually think that you should, and move this sort of bracket of morphemes earlier in the scope and sequence to unlock more spelling, and here's why. We go, awesome. We can just take that chunk and shift it, and it doesn't really cost us anything. It's a few hours of work, and then we've got it changed, so it's our scope and sequence is a living document, and it's been through many, many iterations, and it will continue going through iterations. It's not something that's sort of set in stone that we're defending till we die. We're saying, no, we understand that things are going to change, and we will change with it. And as more best advice comes through, we will adjust to that best advice. So that's something that's great with software as well. You can sort of just change a few things, and you've got a whole
Yes. Yeah. You can actually make it fairly specific. Yeah, because I must admit, like I work off like I've got like a base scope and sequence, but every now and then I'll just like just tweak it a little bit, just depending on who I'm teaching, right? And where they're at, and if they ask a particular question and they're really excited about something, then I'll be like, oh, you know what, we're going to do that next week. So no, I love that. I love the fact that it's so adaptable, because we as humans, we're adaptable, and we're not always stuck in stone. So yeah. So my next question is, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of this journey, what would you say?
Beginning of the Spellcaster journey or my entire journey in education?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Like if you let's take it. Let's say if you could go back and give yourself some advice 10 years ago when you first started teaching, what advice? And then what
Yeah.
advice would you give yourself? So two parts to the question.
Yeah. Okay. So part one, started teaching. My first advice, I put down the running record. Don't spend
Yes.
so much time putting together running records and doing all the running records. I think that I certainly would have. I think the thing I would have put myself onto earlier is that just the one paper or a bit of research you probably start with is cognitive load theory. For me, even before I got to phonics, just understanding cognitive load theory was a game changer. And I still look at that as probably one of the most influential pieces of like topics or areas in my
Yeah.
teaching career. And it still sticks with me. And it actually inflects everything we do in Spellcaster. We're always thinking of like, if we add a sound effect here, is that creating extraneous load that will take away from working memory?
Yes.
How do we keep
Yes.
the focus on the thing we want them to be focused on rather than other stuff? So it's still something that's kind of undergirds everything we do. So I think I would have put myself onto cognitive load theory, and then as we discussed, Heather, I think that would have opened up what else is out there? What is this thing called the science of learning? What is
Oh,
primary and
yes.
secondary
Yeah.
knowledge? What's a knowledge-rich curriculum? Something that I was always in my heart knew was powerful. But at the time I went into teaching, it was very much 21st century skills. Don't worry about knowledge. And I sort of just always felt like something was off about that, but I just trusted the kind of, that's what we do. And so I think that, so bring myself more into things like cognitive load theory and, Eddie Hirsch's work around knowledge-rich curriculum. And I think I would have done that earlier. Now, in terms of Spellcaster, I think for us, it's an interesting challenge because particularly when you're in a pilot phase and lots of people are using you, to understand who you're for and who you're not for. And when I say who you're not for, it's like who we're not like appropriate for.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had some schools using us for their, foundation level learners as part of their instructional mix. And it was interesting to see how that went. We really build ourselves as for older learners. And I think that's where it's sort of now we're coming to the end of the pilot. People are saying, do we want to switch over to subscriptions or not? It's the schools that are working with, and it's people that are working with the older learners that are saying, yeah, we want to keep going with Spellcaster. We love it for our older learners. They're really enjoying it. And the ones that we're trying with the earlier year levels are kind of going, no, we probably don't need it for them, which in a way is helpful. It's clarifying and helps us go, we're not for everybody, and we can't be for everybody. And nor should, I think I'm more comfortably, I think also ethically with a product that does have a gamified element to it, working with older learners who are sort of probably already doing stuff on computers and things like that, and keeping a lot of that much more paper-based, handwriting driven work, adult led driven work with those younger kids, where that's the kind of front and center focus there, and that's not who we work with. We'll totally honor all the work that other programs are doing with them, but really for us, it's about those older learners, the kids that I worked with, who really need that support. So I think just remembering early on to stay focused on who your kind of core user is always important. So but otherwise I've been pretty happy with how we've done things because it's had so much input from our amazing community.
Yeah. And it's cool. Like it's cool at the moment because yeah, I don't know. I sort of feel like everybody's on this I don't know, maybe it's just me, but and you know, when I talk to people like you, but there is just so much room for growth and there's so much exciting stuff out there. And I think you've tapped into the right area too, because I feel like there's a lot of programs and things that are quite niche for that five to, you know, even four to sort of nine.
Yeah,
But there's not a lot, and we've seen this in a lot of the chat groups, that there's not a lot out there for those older learners that have been sort of left behind, missed the foundation skills, but need something to keep them going. So yeah, I
yeah,
think I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it's really cool. Like we do see like there's teachers crying out for a lot of resources. Um, in that area. So yeah, I think it's really
yeah.
exciting. It's going to
Thank
be
you. Yeah.
really
No, look,
exciting.
our goal is to build the highest quality product we can in this space for the lowest cost possible. So we don't want that cost to be a barrier to adoption. We want people to just use it, love it, and give us lots of feedback and
Mhm.
help us grow it. You know, work with our community in that respect. So yeah, that's where we're focused, is just making it easy for those teachers that are crying out for things to pick us up and use it as part of their instructional mix.
Mm, mm. Oh, that's awesome. And so I just thought I'll just ask you to give me a little bit of information about where you're most active, and
Okay.
where can people find you if they want to get in touch? I mean, we'll pop a wee bit in the show notes, but yeah, and in terms of social platforms, where are you most active? Uh,
Yeah, so we've got the I'm not on X or anything like that, but I have Rupert underscore Spellcaster. So just look up Spellcaster on Instagram. So
yep.
that's where I'm mainly active. I mainly post my updates. I've also got a newsletter sort of that people can sign up to. And then there's just my email, Rupert at Spellcaster.education, that people can just, flick me an email. Yeah, that's, you can reach me in those ways. And then we've got a Spellcaster users group on Facebook,
Yep.
which people who aren't users that are just curious are very welcome to join. So we say users group, but it could be former users, it could be future users, it could be people who are just interested in, that's really a space for people to share their knowledge, give feedback again. I often
Yep.
pop things in and saying, hey, we're thinking of doing articulatory gestures because of feedback we got from a speech. What do people think about that? And here's, and so that's kind of, and then we get feedback about whether we're doing it right and whether we're on the right track with that. So yes, the Facebook group, Spellcaster users group, Rupert underscore Spellcaster on Instagram, and Rupert at Spellcaster.education is my email.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. And I thought I might just finish up with just saying if you had any advice out there for like teachers or parents, yeah, just wanting to explore a little bit more about literacy and yeah, what sort of advice would you give around that?
Yeah, I think I'm someone who's always kind of empathic to how hard it can be and how daunting it can be to get into to begin to sort of the journey into structural literacy. And I think a lot of people are on that journey now, but as we said before, sometimes you're going to feel like the more you know, the less you know.
Oh
So I think
yeah.
you just be kind to yourself about it and take it slowly, ask questions, and um, understand that you'll always be trying to figure it out, and I think that's okay. It's kind of like the beauty and the gold comes from that process of figuring it out and being self-aware and self-critical and in a positive way, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
just sort
absolutely.
of enjoy. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I would look, that's what I would say to myself, is that you're not going to know everything immediately. It's a journey you're on, and there's lots of people who are on that journey too. And sometimes I think people can look at what other people are doing out there and feel quite daunted and overwhelmed, or that they're not good enough or doing it well enough.
Mm.
But I think the fact that people are trying and on that journey and are seeking to sort of engage with literacy in this kind of aspect, I think is really amazing. And I think people should be, pat themselves on the back and always be support. Say you're a busy teacher, you're a busy parent, you can't know everything. So what you're doing is amazing. The fact you're just sort of trying to go on that journey and putting one foot in front of the other, is really cool. So I don't know. That's my positive pep talk.
Oh, no, no, I totally agree with you. And I think it's really good because we all started somewhere. Like I
Yeah.
before doing what I'm doing, I was an early childhood teacher. So, you know,
Oh, cool.
my background was all behavioral and just, I mean, it was oral language, but even back then I didn't understand about the importance of oral languages. Oral language is one of those foundational skills.
Mm,
I always think, oh my gosh, I could have even done that a lot better than I did at the time. But yeah,
yeah.
you're right. Like we all had to start somewhere. And yeah, and I'm on that whole big knowledge journey at the moment. And I've only just got to that. Like I've only just got into
Mm,
the importance of background knowledge um and you know, this is my sixth, I think, year of teaching intervention, and I've only just
mm,
on to the importance of background knowledge. So I mean, so there we go. It's
yeah.
I mean, I think I've always understood, but yeah, you're right. Like we can't we need to be kind to ourselves, don't we? That
Yeah.
it's as much as we'd love to do a course and come out knowing absolutely everything, it's absolutely impossible. So yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, look, thank you so much for this morning. This has been really awesome. It's been really cool to learn about you, and your background and your journey, and where it's taken you, how Spellcaster was developed, and where it fits
Mm,
in the educational landscape. I think that's been really
mm,
cool. Yeah, and just also to find what I'm loving is that these everybody that's out there is building something in the educational landscape has got there through some passion and some drive, um,
yeah.
revolving around their past work, and I just I think that's the whole reason that I wanted to get these stories out there, is that there's
Mm.
yeah that there's so much more to the background of people and how they got there. So yeah, it's been really awesome to learn about that today. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's been great to share it. Thank you for providing some space to share that story, Heather. And, yeah, it's been lovely to chat. So thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now, let me start that again. I won't edit that bit out. That will be too much for me to do. Right, start that one again. Now, Mihi for joining us on Love Literacy Inspired. And if this conversation lit a spark, please share it with someone who would love it too. So you can follow me on YouTube and on Spotify, and I will be getting onto some more platforms shortly. And until next time, keep sharing stories, keep asking questions, and keep loving literacy. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No worries.